The topic for today's discussion is Islam or atheism, which one makes more sense? Now before we even talk about Islam or atheism, we need to discuss something very important. What does it mean by making more sense? That's an important point, because my thesis today is going to argue that atheism and atheists, without having any offense, this is my personal opinion, not the opinion of Hamza Andreas Tzortzis or anybody else, or the majority of the Muslims, is that atheists are irrational. And this is not funny, because this is what I mean by making more sense. There are two concepts in Western philosophy that also belong in Islamic philosophy. And we have the profound debate of the rationalists, the rationalists, versus, who knows this? The empiricists, okay? Now these are two different understandings of epistemology. How do we get to know knowledge? Can we know anything at all? What is the source of knowledge? Now the rationalists, they believe in something called a priori. Okay? I'm going to discuss what that means. And the empiricists, they follow a thesis of a posteriori. Okay? Now these are two key concepts. A priori actually means that human beings have innate inbuilt concepts, and we could get knowledge that's not dependent on experience. Very important. And Socrates, he gave us an amazing example. He said you have two planks of wood. Okay, these are planks of wood, right? These are equal planks of wood. How do we know they're equal? How do we know? Is it because we have the concept of equality first before we understand the experience? Or does the experience tell us what equality is, and at the same time, instantaneously, we can say this is equal? Okay? So that's a way of justifying that there is knowledge independent of experience. Another way of looking at this is talking about the thing called causality. Things that bring things into effect. Cause and effect. Immanuel Kant, very famous philosopher, he basically said we do have a priori, an innate concept, because what did Kant say? He said we could justify this by causality itself. And he said causality is not known by experience. It's innate, it's inbuilt. The fitra, the innate disposition we talk about in Islam. And he justified it in the following way. For example, if I'm looking at this auditorium, and I'm looking at the brother on my left, the brother on my right, the ceiling above, the floor, I choose to order my perception from one place to another. But if there was a brother that was running across this room, I could only see his front before I see his back. Now, the way I understand I could shape my perceptions in my own order, if I could order them or not, is based on causality. If we never had the concept of causality, we could never understand the order of our perceptions. Think about this, Let me illustrate with a house. Okay, you have a house here, okay? There's doors, windows. You could choose what to look at in this house. You could look at the door first, one, the window second, the other window third, the roof fourth, and the wall fifth. You could order your perceptions because it's still. However, if you had a little man, and he was running, whoosh, there he goes, and you were here, you could only see his front first before you see his back. So we understand we can't order our perceptions. And the concept that allows us to understand if we could order our perceptions here or there is causality. So experience, touch and feel, doesn't really give us that knowledge. So there's a difference between these two schools of thoughts. And the atheists predominantly are here. Okay? The atheists are here. Empiricists. That's why they're irrational. Because we're the rational guys. They're the empiricists. That's why I said they're irrational. And I'm justifying it from philosophy. And I'm going to discuss why. Now Islam is based on three major intellectual components, okay? Islam is based on the existence of God and His oneness, the miraculous nature of the Quran, i.e. the Quran is a signpost to the transcendent, it's a miraculous book, and the truthfulness of the Prophet's claim, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to prophethood itself. Three main claims here. God exists, the Quran can be attributed to this eternal, uncaused, immaterial being. And 3, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet. And we could justify that using logical deduction, rational deduction, something that I'm going to talk to you about in a bit. So, let's talk about the first topic now. God's existence. Now, brothers and sisters, we've all asked the same questions. Why we are here? Why is there something rather than nothing? The famous rationalist, philosopher, the German Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, he said, why does something exist rather than nothing? And this is an idea that we all talk about all the time. Why does something exist rather than nothing? I mean, it puzzled people so much that even the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, he said he would rather that there be no existence at all. And he even wrote a philosophical piece on trying to justify suicide. Because he thought this world was just a random accident and we're just like in trouble. Even the existentialist, Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, what did he say? He said this is a mindless world. It's a chaotic world running into nothingness. Jean-Paul Sartre, the other existentialist, what did he say? He said there's no meaning to this world. It's nothing. He even wrote a book on nothingness. And he was in self-delusion because he said, well, you create purpose for yourself, but deny purpose for your existence. I think that's self-delusional. Anyway, that's a side topic. So, God's existence. And we could justify God's existence because we ask these questions. Why does something exist rather than nothing? And that's a profound question. So, brothers and sisters, what I'm going to use a key argument for the existence of God, which is known as the cosmological argument. But it's a refined version of the cosmological argument because some of the cosmological arguments were not in line with Islamic theology. Okay? It was more of a kind of Mu'tazili tendency, a rationalist tendency, which doesn't mean this rationalist, by the way, and I'll explain later. But this refined version of the cosmological argument is actually what I call a Quranic cosmological argument. Because the premises of this argument are based in the Quran itself. So, the premises are as follows. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Okay? 2. The universe, what am I going to write here, guys? Began to exist. Good. Okay, what's the conclusion? 3, therefore. That's it. Okay. I'm going to do that for the universe, okay? So these are 3 main premises. 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. And since these 2 statements are true, then you have a valid argument. In logic, if the conclusion follows the premises, it's a valid argument. It becomes a sound argument, which means it's true, because you could justify both of these premises. And that's what I'm going to do now. No one can deny premise number 1. Premise number 1 is almost an undeniable fact for many reasons. 1, historical, social, and experiential. Human beings, when we hear something like a bang, we know it came from somewhere. Hamza's heavy hand, okay? So we know things, when they begin to exist, they have a cause. Significantly, and I gave you the example of Immanuel Kant, to deny causality would to deny that you have the ability to order your own perceptions. Do you remember when I gave you the example of the house? You could order what you perceive on the house, but when something's running across the table, for example, you don't have a choice to order your perceptions. And the ability to understand that is that we have the innate concept of, causality. So we are justified to follow this premise. Whatever begins to exist as a cause. Now the only counter-argument is from the atheist camp. The irrationalists. The empiricists, do you remember? Because everything is based on touch and feel. Something that denies their own existence, in my own opinion, because they can't even prove by an empirical route that their great-great-great-great-great-grandmother exists. We don't have her DNA. We don't have her grave. So she doesn't exist, does she? And they may say, oh, but wait a minute. We're here today, so she must have existed. But you're using rational thinking now. That's the point. You can't have your cake and eat it. So we're justified on this premise. But there's a counter-argument, and what the atheists say is this. In the quantum vacuum, let's call this V, QV, yeah? The quantum vacuum, there are particles that just jump into existence out of nowhere. Yeah? And it's so freaky that two particles could exist at the same time in two different places. This is the matrix going on here, man. Yeah? However, there's a slight cheat of hand here, okay? Because the quantum vacuum, okay, is not equal to nothing. The quantum vacuum is actually something. Any basic level of physics will make you understand that the quantum vacuum is a rich structure. It obeys the laws of nature, and it's a sea of fluctuating energy. It's a sea of fluctuating energy. So things do not come out of nothing from that perspective. In actual, they come out from the vacuum itself, because the vacuum is not nothing. So there's nothing that can deny this premise. That is the only known counter-argument to premise number one that I know of. But we can have a discussion in the Q&A. Number two, the universe began to exist. This we can justify from two perspectives. One is talking about the infinity, okay? The infinite. Now, this is a sign for infinite, okay? The universe began to exist. Now, if the universe never had a beginning, what would that mean, brothers and sisters and friends? It would mean it didn't have a cause, that's good, but what else would it mean? It would mean that the universe's history is going towards what? Infinite. Excellent. But there's a big problem here. The concept of the infinite cannot be exported into the real world. Okay? Into the real world. The concept of the infinite cannot be exported into the real world. Let me give you some examples. Say, for example, we had an infinite number of Richard Dawkins in this room. Everyone know who Richard Dawkins is, yeah? Good. He's the prophet of neo-atheism, yeah? So, if there was an infinite number of Richard Dawkins in this room, and I took away 2 Richard Dawkins, how many Richard Dawkins do we have left? Okay, we have still infinity, we have infinity minus 2. Fine. If it's infinity, we've taken 2 less than infinity, and surely that means it's not infinity anymore. Also, if it's infinity minus 2, then what does that mean? That means surely we should be able to count how many Richard Dawkins are in this room. So what happens is, even the mathematicians agree with this, that the infinity can't be exported into the real world. It exists in the mathematical universe, in the mathematical discourse, with axioms and convections that make sense in that world, but doesn't really make sense in the real world. I'll give you another example. Say there's a distance between me, my Chinese friend called me, yeah, and Richard Dawkins, okay, RD. We could potentially split this distance into infinite parts, and we'll never get to the end. Potentially. But I could actually walk this distance. So the infinite in the real world is potential and never actual. So every example we bring into the real world, we understand that the infinity leads to contradictions and paradoxes and absurdities in the real world. It just doesn't make any sense. And that's why the history of the universe are real things too. So it necessitates that the universe must have had a beginning in time, because the infinity doesn't make any sense. That's the philosophical argument. The other argument is that we know the universe began to exist at a point in time because of what? Who's heard of the Big Bang Theory? Only 5 of you have heard of the Big Bang Theory? Good. And it's not that thing that happens after too many curries. Okay? I use that all the time and people still laugh. Okay? Must be one of those infinite jokes. Okay, so the Big Bang, according to the hot standard model of the Big Bang, the universe came from a point in time. T is equal to 0. Okay? And the universe from that point onwards was expanding. Okay, we've got expansion. According to prominent scientists like Schramm, Beatrice Tinley and others, they said that the universe was shrunk down to nothing at all. Was actually shrunk down to a point of infinite mass, 0 volume. What is infinite mass, zero volume? It's a scientific word for nothing. So they just made up nothing to sound cool. Just like what we do with killing innocent civilians, they call it collateral damage. It's a very kind of abstract word. Anyway, that's another topic. We're not doing politics today. That's November 24th, okay? Finkelstein in Birmingham. Anyway, sorry, I'm advertising. So what was I saying? What was I talking about? Yeah, how some physicists say at this point, yeah, which is not really t minus 0, but at a certain point here, we don't know what happens. The laws of nature break down. So they give an example of two beakers. One's full of water and one's empty. And this is t is equal to 0. And from this place, whatever this place is, yeah, it starts to sound like religious people. The water fills this thing here in order to have the Big Bang. So whatever happens is a t is equal to 0. There's a t equal to 0. There's a time, according to cosmological theory, that the universe began to exist at a point in time. There was nothing, and now there's something. This is similar to the religious explanation of ex nihilo. Ex nihilo in Latin means from nothing. It was created from nothing. So we've got two arguments that the infinity doesn't make any sense, and scientific cosmological theory to justify the universe began to... Is everyone following me so far? Good. So what logically follows, the logicians amongst us? Well, therefore the universe is a cause. Because if whatever begins to exist as a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe must have a cause. Does this mean it's God? Who would say this cause is God? You blind faith people. No, it just means it's a cause. You can't say anything now. And what's quite interesting is that the Quran actually gives us these premises. The Quran says, which is the book of the Muslims by the way, the Quran says, do you think the heavens and the earth, i.e. the universe, came from nothing? Do you think it created itself? Do you think you created it? So it gives you this kind of questioning, because the Quran is a dynamic book that way. It makes you really think, makes you really ponder on man, life and the universe. Hence, it always talks about أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ. Do they not reflect within themselves? أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do they not use their minds? Do they not use their intellect? So it's telling us about the universe. When you ponder the universe, are you saying this whole thing came out of nothing? You guys are crazy. Yeah? Anyway, so we know there's a cause. We know the cause for the universe. Now, the rationalists, we want to talk about the rationalist thinkers, they would find out what this cause is. The empiricist would just shut up. Do you know why? Because they just say it has to be based on touch and feel. And this cause must be immaterial, but we don't have any experience of touch and feel that's immaterial. So we can't say anything. This is why they deny the existence of God. It's based not on evidence, because they don't have any evidence. It's based on the fact of their method of thinking. That's the profound point we need to understand. So when Richard Dawkins always complains, which to be honest, I think he's a bit of a coward, because he goes on Channel 4 and picks at little girls with hijabs. I don't know if you saw that program. You know, big guy, big brain of the world, talking to 3 little 7-year-olds. How dare you believe in evolution? Believe in me. Yeah? And that's the problem here. That's the arrogance of atheism, in my opinion. Not only do they presume atheism to be true, but they stick to a method of thinking that is 1960s. Because the reason I'm saying it's 1960s, because there was this movement called logical positivism in 1960s, which meant everything you say must be verified. In America, they used to call it verificationism. So even when you say, I love you, to your mother or your wife, you have to prove it. And then you just end up giving them chocolate. Give them all those chemicals, yeah? Right, that's another discussion. So this cause, if this cause caused the universe, there's some things that we can rationally assess. One, this cause must be one. The reason it must be one because of the philosophical principle in science and philosophy called Occam's razor. How do you spell it again? There you go, Occam's razor. Obviously I don't use a razor, so that's not a funny joke. Occam's razor, which is do not multiply entities beyond necessity. Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. So, therefore it must be one. The famous philosopher and theologian, Al-Ghazali, the 11th century theologian, he made a profound point. He said, the reason it must be one also, because outside of the universe, we don't have any conceptual differentiators, okay? There you go, sorry. That's why I don't use Microsoft Word all the time, it does all the spelling for you. Yeah, conceptual differentiators. And what he meant was this. We know that there's more than one human being in this room because of what? Because of placement, distance, shape, height, volume, and size. This is the way that we know that there is duality, there's more than one thing. But outside of the universe, we don't have any of these concepts. We don't have any of these concepts, so we can't even claim its duality is more than one cause. Because we don't have any concepts to make us understand that. Because we don't have a sensation of space, distance, and etc. So it must be one. The second point is, it must be immaterial. Why do we say this? For many reasons. The first reason is, because it calls the material world. If you just say it must be material also, you're just expanding the boundaries of the universe. Because the universe is a sum of all matter. And if you're expanding the boundaries of the universe, we still come to the question about how did it come to be, if it began to exist at a point in time. So that's why some of the ridiculous scientists, in my opinion, like Stephen Hawking, how arrogant do I sound when I'm cussing Stephen Hawking? But it's true. No. The reason it's true, I was reading his book the other day, The Grand Design. I'm like, oh my God. He's saying philosophy is dead. That's what he said. And thinking is dead. Everything can be based on our touch and feel and these theoretical models that exist in the mathematical realm of discussion. He's saying basically that the universe created itself. I mean, would you accept such a proposition? If I said I created myself, that would mean I'm in existence and not in existence at the same time. And that's another discussion. So it must be material because it created the material world. The third point, it must be uncaused. Because one of the only arguments I've heard from all the atheists, specifically when I had a debate with Professor Simon Blackburn in Cambridge University, one of the top atheists in the country, all he came up with me was saying, well, who caused God then? Is that all you have? But that's all they have. You could cut questions after. Honestly, you're going to have an hour. I'll give you an hour. Okay? So don't worry. I know you're frustrated, but we get frustrated too. We live in a post-secular society, and the atheists are getting their guns out. It's time we got some guns out too, yeah? Okay, so uncaused. Uncaused, yeah? It must be uncaused because of the absurdity of an infinite regress of causes. Okay? The absurdity of an infinite regress of causes. The reason it's absurd is because if there's a cause to the cause of the universe, then what stops us saying there's a cause for the cause for the cause of the universe? Well, let's carry on. Then there's a cause for the cause for the cause for the cause for the cause of the universe. Who's stopping me? Then there's a cause for the cause for the cause for the cause for the cause. You start doing rapping. We start becoming rappers, for God's sake. And therefore, we end up with the infinite regress. We would never have the universe in existence in the first place. The very question denies the existence of the universe. I'll give you an example. I'm going to hold this table up. Hold this table, brother. Stop, stop. You got to ask his permission behind you. See? And if he does that, and he does that, and there's a whole chain of asking permissions, and that goes forever, am I going to get help picking up the table? Thank you. It's why a rational necessity, there must be uncaused cause for the universe. 4. This is a very important point. It must have a will. Why must it have a will? It must have a will because if it's uncaused, i.e., it's in an eternal existence, and it brought into existence a finite effect, like the universe, then it must have chosen the universe to come into existence. Because material causes and effects usually exist in the same time scale. Look, almost same time. You see, the cause, the effect of moving the table. Even if you were to, like, for example, push this, it's almost asymmetrical, it's almost instantaneous. The cause and the effect, they exist with one another. Significantly, if you had boiling water 100 degrees for eternity past, you'll have boiling water for eternity past. The cause existing with the effect. But since we know this is an uncaused cause, i.e. an eternal reality, it brought into existence a finite effect, it must have chosen the universe to come to existence. And choice indicates a will, and a will indicates a relationship with the universe. So even just using our minds, rational thinking, This cause must be one, immaterial, uncaused, and have a will. Lo and behold, this is so in line with the Quranic view on God, as Quran says in the 112th chapter, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Say, He is God, the one, the unique, the eternal, the immaterial, the subsisting, the one that was not begotten and He doesn't beget. And there is nothing like unto Him, He's immaterial. So our fitrah, our innate disposition, our rational faculties can come to the conclusion that there is a cause for the universe that is one, immaterial, uncaused, and has a will. That is the basic definition of God from a Quranic perspective. So we have good reasons to believe as theists, as Muslims, that God indeed does exist. And a thesis that opposes this is a very empirical thesis. It's a thesis that is irrational, because they don't use the method of rational thought, they use the method of empiricism. So that's why I've justified my claim in the beginning that atheists are irrational. Thank you. Now, that's the first point of the Islamic worldview. The second point is actually justifying the Quran itself. Okay? Now, the Quran we could quickly say is a miracle. Now, what do we mean by miracle? First and foremost, we don't mean the old David Hume discussion of a miracle. David Hume was the famous skeptic Scottish philosopher who didn't even believe in causality. Okay? David Hume, he said, miracles are incoherent because they are violations of natural law. That's what he said. Miracles don't make sense because they're just violations of natural law. But that is the profound point here. I agree with him. That description of miracles doesn't make any sense, because what is natural law? Natural laws are just inductive generalizations of patterns we perceive in the universe. This is universe, okay? Now, they just are inductive generalizations of patterns we perceive in the universe. If the pattern changes, does that mean it's a miracle? Maybe it was part of the pattern. So if we've been observing all our life this pattern, say for almost eternity, and all of a sudden you have this, yeah? According to that description, that would be a miracle. Yeah, because it's violating a natural law. But miracles don't make sense from that perspective. This is why the Islamic view of miracles is far more logical, far more profound. It's something that the Christian philosophers have also copied. Okay? In my opinion. They've copied it, plagiarism. Okay, so what is a miracle? It's basically an act of impossibility. Or in more technical terms, it is an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. In English language, that basically means you can't find a naturalistic explanation by exhausting everything we know about nature and all the possible possibilities. So it's an act of impossibility or an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature. My argument is that the Quran Q is a miracle from that description for three main reasons. Well, the Quran, first and foremost, we need to understand its nature. The nature of the Quran is a very dynamic book. It's not a book, it's not a linear book that has a beginning and an end. Genesis and then Apocalypse. Yeah? The Quran is not like that. The Quran is a four-dimensional text. And to be honest, for me, that indicates that it's a timeless book. It doesn't stay in a certain time. You flick through it, it just jumps out continuously. This is why the book can be argued to be a very existential book. It talks about the self, about our place in the universe and our relation with God and mankind and nature itself. This is why it asks profound questions and always uses the word يَتَفَكَّرُونَ, for those who reflect, which comes from the Arabic stem فَكَرَى, which you have words like tafakkur, to think, to reflect. And the implications of this meaning is so profound. It doesn't mean just reflect, any old reflection and meditation and contemplation. It actually means The thing that you're reflecting upon, you must inquire about its implications. What does it mean that the universe began to exist at a point in time? What does it mean that you have a self, you have a consciousness? And consciousness is this subjective reality that has no resemblance to matter. So how can something that has no resemblance to matter came from matter? That doesn't make sense. This is why Richard Dawkins even says, we don't know, when he talks about the consciousness or the self. So when you want to really deal with the atheist argument, talk to them about consciousness and free will, and then the logical conclusions of atheism will be totally against what they already believe. And this is like the self-delusion of the atheist, in my opinion. But we could discuss that further. So the Quran is a miracle for many reasons. One, it has a linguistic miracle. Okay? Two, historical. Three, natural phenomena, which many of you call scientific, but I don't use that word. Okay? The Quran is a linguistic miracle because, first and foremost, it bravely challenges mankind to bring something like it with regards to its unique structural features. Not aesthetic receptors. We're not talking about Shakespeare here, or Homer. Okay, we're not talking about how it moves the heart, which the Quran does. Some people used to listen to the Quran and some of them would just die. Arabs would die when they heard the Quran. Think about how profound that language is, yeah? But it's not about the aesthetic reception, it's about its structural features. And the Quran challenges mankind very bravely. It says in the second chapter, in the 23rd verse, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ فِي رَيْبٍ مِمَّا نَزَلْنَا عَلَىٰ عَبْدِنَا فَأْتُوا بِسُورَةٍ مِّن مِثْلِهِ وَادْعُوا شُهَدَاءَكُم مِّن دُونِ اللَّهِ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. And if you're in doubt, talking to everybody here, those who doubt, the humanists, the atheists, the agnostics, the philosophers, the scholars, the teachers, the scientists, the physicists, those sitting on the fence, those in the fence, everybody, yeah? If you're in doubt about this book that we have sent down to our servant Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then bring one chapter like it. Bring one chapter like it. The smallest chapter in the Quran is Surah Al-Kawthar, the abundance, which is only 3 lines long. And what we know, this challenge came in the context of a historical reality. Because according to Western and Eastern scholarship, the Arabs at the time of revelation were Arabic linguists par excellence. They were the best at expressing themselves in the Arabic language. This is why Ibn Rashid, a very famous Arabic historian, he said the Arabs at the time of revelation, they would celebrate 2 things. The birth of a boy, and when a poet rose amongst them. So there was a socialization of language being the best at that point. And the Quran came to challenge those best placed to challenge the Quran. And they failed. They failed. Even the best Arab linguist of the time, Walid ibn al-Mughira, he said, by Allah, he even swore by God and said, this cannot come from a human being. I'm the best in poetry and prose and expressing in Arabic language, but the Quran has surpassed this. And this is supported by Western scholarship. For example, Martin Zamet, a Dutch scholar, he said the Quran is the most eminent written manifestation of the Arabic language. Also, you have people like Professor Bruce Lawrence from Duke University. In his book, The Quran, a Biography, on page 8, he says, as tangible signs, Quranic verses are expressive of an inexhaustible truth. They signify meaning, layered within meaning, light upon light, miracle after miracle. Reverend R. Bosworth Smith, in his book Muhammad and Mohammedanism, he says the Quran is a miracle of purity of style, of wisdom and of truth. It is one miracle claimed by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a miracle indeed it is. We could discuss this later in the Q&A because there's more technical features to this. And you don't have to know the Arabic language, by the way, to justify this. We could use a process called logical deduction, which we could do in the Q&A. Historical. The Quran is a historical miracle because there was an absence of historical knowledge at the time with regards to certain things. For example, calling the leader of the Egyptians. There was 2 names. It was Malik and Pharaoh. How do you spell Pharaoh? Yeah? Like that, yeah? Now, this also goes against the borrowing theory, because everyone's saying, oh, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam just borrowed things from the Bible and the Torah, which is a fallacy. Because if he borrowed things, why didn't he keep the wrong things in there? From where did he know how to correct them? Especially if they're very minute details. And one of the minute details is king or pharaoh. Malik meaning king or pharaoh. In the biblical tradition, it's the leader of the Egyptians is always mentioned as Pharaoh. But the Quran distinguishes them between Malik and Fir'aun. And one is at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, Joseph, is it Joseph? Yeah. And Moses, Musa alayhi salam. And when we look into the hieroglyphics, and hieroglyphics weren't translated then, we had no idea until we found the Rosetta Stone. Good. So, the issue is how did the Quran know, how did the Prophet know that at a period in time, Pharaoh wasn't called Pharaoh, he was actually called the king, Malik, and at another period in time, he was actually started to be called Pharaoh. It's a historical miracle, because there is no natural explanation to come to this conclusion, because at that time, there was no knowledge then. Unless you're a conspiracy theorist, then that raises a lot of questions. Because where did he get the knowledge from? If he copied it from the Bible, and all the mainstream texts around that society always mention Pharaoh, then where did he get Malik from? And why is it exactly at the right time, according to modern studies? This is what I call historical miracle. Another aspect is the scientific phenomena, the natural phenomena, scientific miracle. We know the science at the time of Arabia, they used to believe that mountains used to hold up the sky. Here's the sky, okay? It might drop on your head. Okay? This is the primitive knowledge of science at the time. There was other science, like we had the science of Galen, that was borrowed at that time, but his science on embryology wasn't accurate and he was also wrong. But the point I'm trying to make here is the science at the time was either guesswork, okay, like Archimedes, the famous Greek philosopher, he did some great guesswork with regards to physics and came up with some laws that we call physical laws now. So there was some nice guesswork or speculation based on theory, but on specifics there was no accuracy. The Quran, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ apparently knew, and this is one example, but with many examples in the Quran, that in Surah Naba, I think the 70th chapter of the Quran, it talks about mountains having pegs. Okay, this is the earth, that's the mountain, and it has a peg-like structure that's usually 3 to 10 times bigger than the original structure. How could he have known this? And not only that, the Quran mentions that it's to stabilize the earth to prevent from having even more destabilizations in the earth crust. Something which the geologists in only the past 30 to 40 years have called isostasis. The Quran mentions this explicitly over 1400 years ago. And my argument is, why mention such an irrelevant detail? Honestly, it has no relevance to Arabian society. They weren't scientists. A lot of the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, they just took this as information. But this is what the Quran says, and we will show you our signs, our evidences throughout time. And here we are now, able to understand what this really means, that they are like peg-like structures, which many geologist books actually call them pegs almost, root-like structures, and they have this effect of isostasis, to basically stabilize the earth crust. Now my argument is, how can an illiterate man from an illiterate people come out blazing with a miraculous structure of language, coming out with historical minutiae that were even irrelevant at that time, but were still mentioned for accuracy, and also describe natural phenomena that were impossible to come just blazing out of the human mind, especially if we didn't have the equipment that we have today, 1400 years fast forward. So this shows us that there are no naturalistic explanations for the features of the Quran. So it's in line with an act of impossibility. These are acts of impossibility because for the language we have the 28 or 29 Arabic letters. We're not going to have another 30th letter or the 31st letter of the Arabic language. And when you exhaust all possible combinations, you can't come with the style and the structure of the Quran. Historical miracle, at that time we had none of this knowledge, it was impossible to find this knowledge, therefore there's no naturalistic explanation. Natural phenomena, we didn't have the equipment to even fathom that mountains had this process of, had this peg-like structures, and they created this process of isostasis, stabilizing the earth crust. So therefore we have good reasons to believe that the Quran is an act of impossibility. It's an event that lies outside the productive capacity of nature, because we've gone into the nature of language, history and science at the time, and we cannot attribute it to nature itself. Therefore, we're seeking for supernaturalistic explanations. So we have good argument to say that the Quran is indeed from God. Now, the last argument is a beautiful argument. It's about the Prophet's claim to prophethood. This is actually borrowed in a way from the C.S. Lewis Christian argument, but it really applies to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, was a very interesting man. The Prophet himself, he was amongst his Arabian brethren for 40 years. He was known to be a good guy, to bring people together to feed the poor. And he was living amongst Arabian society. All of a sudden, he came with this paradigm shift. Everything was turned on its head. Politics, theology, spirituality, economics, religion, everything changed on its head because of La ilaha illallah, the profound concept that there is no deity worthy of worship apart from Allah, apart from God Himself. And he came with the message that he was the Prophet. This is why in the declaration of faith as Muslims, we say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship but Allah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. And I testify that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his slave, his servant, and his messenger. So, there are only a few possibilities about this claim. One, he was a liar. Two, he was deluded. 3, he was both. Or 4, he was speaking the truth. What does entertain these? Can the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam be a liar? Well, this creates more problems than it solves. Especially the Orientalists, they would say, we would love to call him a liar, but to do so would create so many different philosophical problems that we won't be able to deal with. For example, what is the psychological disposition of a liar? He was against something, right? The Prophet didn't gain anything. He sacrificed everything just for the message. La ilaha illallah. There is no deity worthy of worship but God, but Allah Himself. Significantly, he was known as the trustworthy in the time of Arabia. They knew him. They used to ask him to solve disputes. Also, if we look at his life, we see that he was so hungry that he tied 2 stones to his stomach. He used to eat leaves from trees when he was boycotted from his beloved city. He loved children so much that he would almost curse a man for not showing compassion and mercy to his children. But he was stoned by children in a city outside of Mecca. Stoned by children, where his blood was running down his legs and the sandals were stuck to the sand. Something which he called his most difficult day. His wife died. His sons died. His companions were tortured. He was on a battlefield. He was fighting, defending Islam, being hurt and injured. And even at the time of injury and the calamity of war, he's not pressing a button like a lot of cowards do today and pressing a trigger a few miles away. These are cowards, man. Blatant. Yeah, using a hackney term in London. Yeah? This is blatant coward behavior. That time war was sword and sword, man to man. It was fighting. It was in the midst of disaster and turmoil. Imagine the psychology of a man. And he was injured. I think it was a spear that hit through his armor and went through his molar tooth. And he was bleeding. And his companions took him away and carrying him. And whilst he was being carried, he was doing this action. He was stopping the blood dripping from the floor. In that crisis of his worrying about defeat, worrying about his people being killed, worried about his own injury, he was stopping the blood from hitting the floor. And then the companions would ask, "What are you doing, Prophet? What are you doing? Why are you stopping the blood from going onto the floor? Why?" And he said, "Don't you know? I am a Nabi, I am a Prophet, and if my blood hits the ground, I am scared that God, that Allah will shed His anger on these people." He had every right to want God's anger on those people. He was in a state of war. He was fighting the turmoil of fighting at that time face to face, and he was injured, but he still wanted to show mercy to the enemy, because in Islam fighting is not an end, it's a means for justice and a means for mercy at some points when diplomacy fails. And this was the type of character. Is this a liar? You claim that's a liar, then your mother is a liar. She didn't give birth to you then. That's the philosophy here. If you claim the Prophet is a liar, then it's equivalent to saying that your mother never gave birth to you. So he's not a liar. Is he deluded? Was he a madman? See, this is more reasonable from a philosophical perspective. I would say no way, Jose. The reason being, what is the product of a deluded man? Are you really serious that a deluded man would be a founder of a religion? That would basically, you'd have followers of 1.6 billion people? And not just that, the gentleman's laughing, but we'll have a discussion later. Yeah? And then, would it be a product of having a model and principles that are timeless throughout 14 centuries? Come on, this is amazing. I'll give you an example of how he can't be deluded. Islamic economics. Islamic economic theory based on values and principles emanating from the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the Quran itself have transcended 14 centuries. Is this a product of a deluded man? Is this the product of a deluded human being? No. We have scholars from America coming to London giving us lectures, us Brits lectures, on that we must adopt the Islamic economic principles. Because in the biggest credit crunch known in the 21st century, the Islamic economic entities survived better than any other entity because it had certain principles that were emanating from 1400 centuries. Is this the product of a deluded man? And I could go into the Islamic economy in a very profound way. You know, I could talk to you about the 6 pillars. I call them 6 pillars because I only know 6 aspects, that's why there's probably many more. But of Islamic economics. For example, let's take geopolitical theory as an example. Capitalist geopolitical theory says there's not enough resources and too many needs. So that creates an aspect of excessive competition. But the Prophet ﷺ said in a narration in Sahih Tirmidhi, he said that the son of man, the son of Adam, i.e. the human being, all he really needs as essential needs is food, shelter and clothing. And if you look at some geopolitical studies, apparently there's enough resources for essential needs to feed 36 billion people. Don't fall for the trick that these capitalist morons, have said that we don't have enough resources. It is a profound joke. This is why they create concerts thinking that you could dance away poverty. Honestly, and they do this all the time, and they're manipulating your minds. Shame on them and shame on us for not waking up. We're like sheep. Do you know how many concerts we would need in London every day just to remove the interest of one African nation? About 1,000 concerts a day. This is a joke. This whole global poverty thing is a shifts your consciousness into the wrong direction. We need a paradigm shift here. That's what we need. We need a paradigm shift. And that is so true. Anyone studying economics. And you know what? They attribute Adam Smith, the founder, 18th century founder of capitalism, they attribute all these theories to him. But believe me, if he was alive today, he would spit in the faces of a lot of these bankers. Because he would say, human transaction, and this is equivalent to the Shafi'i madhab. In the Shafi'i school of jurisprudence in Islam, an economic transaction is a moral transaction. This is something that Sheikh Hamza Yusuf was talking about on YouTube. Sheikh YouTube. Yeah. So, and he was saying, in that fiqh, it's like you have to be happy and nice and shake hands with the man and express your beautiful nature as a human being and have a social interaction. Yeah? But if you go to anywhere in this country, a lot of these interactions that you have, they're reduced to commercial transactions. That you're just like normal, you're not even human beings. And Adam Smith will spit in the face on these capitalists because they have actually destroyed this planet because of the geopolitical model and their theory, saying that there's too many needs and not enough resources, which is a lie, especially on current geopolitical studies. So, even just taking this one aspect of Islamic economy, which is geopolitical theory, how can this be a deluded man? Does this sound like a delusion to you? No. So we can safely say he wasn't deluded. Is he both? That's impossible. Because a liar is someone who knows he's lying but sticks to it. A deluded person is someone who thinks he's speaking the truth, but in fact is based on a falsehood. Those two things can't coexist. So we've got good reasons to believe that he was speaking the truth, which this is a supportive argument for the Islamic worldview. So, brothers and sisters and friends, I'm going to finish off by talking about something called purpose. Okay? Because I think this makes sense a lot. Now, we've got good rational reasons, not irrational, but rational reasons to believe in the Islamic worldview based on the existence of God, the miracle of the Quran, and the truthfulness of the Prophet's claim, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to prophethood himself. But this is abstract philosophy. Does it really penetrate the heart? Because I converted to Islam about 8 years ago, and it took me a while. I was convinced in all this intellectual gymnastics, yeah? But I didn't take the step forward because it didn't really affect my heart. That's what we have to put in the context of what does it mean to be a human being. This is a profound concept. What does it mean to be a human being? Who am I? I'm reading this book by Carl Rogers. It's called On Becoming a Person. He was like the founder of the humanist-centric approach to counseling. And he was saying, especially in Western society, we run away from who we are all the time. We have these masks, these different personalities, which is quite interesting because the word for personality comes from the Latin word persona, which links to the word mask. Yeah, we all have these masks. We always someone else, we always react to context. We never allow context to react to who we are. And therefore, what we do as human beings, we have two realities. We have what happened, the reality, and then here is our interpretation of what happened. You call your drama or your storyboard. You have a huge drama about life. Those two things are not the same. But we always make them the same. No, he does really hate me. Yeah, she's a... You do that all the time. What we need to do as human beings, I think, is really find the emotional, intellectual space where we know that what happened is not actually the same of our interpretation of what happened. Because our interpretation is based on what? It's based on our conception of who we are. And really, who we are, according to Erich Fromm, the famous psychoanalyst and social theorist, he said, we are just a product of our capitalist system. We are a product of the system that we live in. And if we understand that, then it will change our interpretations a lot. Yeah? I'll give you an example. You're at work, right? And then you're always going to the water fountain, you drink some water. But there's two of your best mates there, always whispering. Yeah? And you're doing that for weeks. And you're like, they hate me, they don't love me anymore, I hate this job. You have an argument with your wife in the morning, you just go crazy, you go to work, and you say, I quit, you guys are everything. And then what happens? He gets sacked because he was naughty. And then what does he find out? His best mates were planning his birthday party. That's the reality of human beings. How many times do we hate our father and our mother? We do it all the time. We do all the time. And a lot of our problems, I think, in my opinion, is based on parenting. Yeah? We just don't, we're not complete with our parents. And it's so important. Even with me, my dad is a great dad, right? For years, even since I was a small boy, he's a humanist, yeah? He's always saying to me, he loves me. You don't even get Muslim fathers saying that to their kids, man. This is why Ibn Qayyim, famous theologian, he said, where you have Islam, you should find mercy. But it's the opposite sometimes. And we need to recapture our tradition of mercy. We are people of rahmah, people of mercy. The Prophet ﷺ said, if you don't show mercy, mercy is not shown to you. And this is so true because human beings, kids. Why does my child, for example, my son, he says to me, Papa, look, spider. He wants to share. Human beings want to share. That's the fitrah, that's the innate disposition. Human beings want to share things all the time. And that's why we want to share mercy and good deeds to other people. It makes us feel better. And that's part of the mercy of God. Giving us that process to feel good about ourselves by being good to others as well. So, my point is, there is a difference between what happened in our drama and our interpretation. Now the reason I'm mentioning this, because it links to purpose of life. The reason it links to purpose of life, because sometimes we're so wound up in our own drama about life, that people hate me, people are against me, I'm not going to achieve anything, it's all about competition, you're not in this free space to really know who you are, you forget about the bigger scheme of things, like your own purpose. Why are you here in the first place? Now from the atheist perspective, and this is the tragedy of atheism, this is the crux of the matter. Who had seen Back to the Future? What is this? What's that? That's the flux capacitor. That allows time travel to happen. Now what I'm going to say is the flux capacitor of why atheism is wrong. Yeah? Now the flux capacitor, the crux of why atheism is wrong, the logical conclusion, these are the logical conclusion of atheism is this. There's no purpose. Okay? There's no purpose, one. Which may be logical. But from that, we're no different than a swarm of flies. No different from a herd of sheep. We're just molecules and atoms. We're a rearrangement of atoms, brothers and sisters. A bombing in Iraq is a rearrangement of molecules. It's not innocent human beings. Because there's no meaning in the atheistic paradigm what innocent really means. Because all we're here to do is to propagate DNA. Richard Dawkins, what does he say in his book, The Selfish Gene? We're just robots, DNA robots want to propagate our DNA. And it's quite interesting, right? If that's all we're here to do, then from a evolutionary perspective, that has justified polygamy for me. It's not about propagating your DNA, isn't it? So really, from a moral theory perspective, atheists should be polygamists. But they're too scared, that's why. Not saying that Muslim men are brave or anything. And plus when we do, we always manipulate as well, which is a bad thing. Anyway, so we're here just to propagate DNA. What value does that have? What value does that have? There's no ontological foundation for morality here. There's no rational basis for morality here. Also, it shows to us from a cold, scientific, empirical, atheistic perspective, we're going to suffer a heat death in the universe, thermodynamics. It's going to be a cold universe one day. It's going to be lifeless. The sun is going to burn out the earth. So what does that mean? That means the philanthropist who was engaging in charitable activities all his life comes to nothing at the end. The researching biochemist who's trying to deal with cancer comes to nothing. All these things come to nothing. It's an empty, lonely universe. This is why a lot of the existential philosophers, one of the existentialists, but other philosophers, they said, should we suicide? They questioned that. That was a big question. David Hume wrote about it. Arthur Schopenhauer wrote about it. Should we suicide? It's a cold universe. We're just here to propagate our DNA. Now one argument the atheists say is, when you have no purpose, you could create purpose for yourself. But that's a self-delusion. You create purpose for yourself, but your very existence has no meaning, has no purpose. I would argue the Islamic view on purpose is far more profound, because it makes sense of consciousness, that consciousness exists, and it also makes sense of morality. Because the evolutionary atheistic paradigm can't justify consciousness. It has no pre-evolutionary forerunner. Consciousness came about. Morality, if we truly believe, without being superficial, that killing a 5-year-old boy is objectively morally wrong, then the atheist paradigm cannot justify it. Because God is the only concept that transcends human subjectivity. There's nothing else. Evolution, it could be a foundation for morality, but it gives it no meaning. Like Mark Aurelius, the famous philosopher of science, an atheist, he said, you think when you say love thy neighbor as thyself, you think you're referring above and beyond yourself. But truly has no foundation. And our morals have evolved like ears or teeth. And it doesn't make it objective, it makes it subjective and relative, because if we've got biological changes, our morals will change too. And evolution can't even justify consciousness or even our rational faculties. So my point being is the logical conclusions that my point is that life doesn't make sense with regards to atheism. It makes life absurd. God as a concept and theism as a concept actually gives life meaning and value. And this is why I mentioned in the beginning about the torture, and they were to torture his kids to save all those human beings. What would you do? Would you go against your very purpose of existence in order to preserve your existence? Muslims wouldn't do that, because they know their purpose is to be moral. Ali Ghazali said, our view is to be moral. So we'll never deny that in order to save our existence, for our existence is to do that. But the atheistic paradigm is, it doesn't matter, mate. It doesn't matter. Kill those 30 people. in order for the rest to survive. Because our values can be broken in order to preserve them, which is the paradox of the atheistic worldview. Brothers and sisters, I'm sure we're going to have a very enlightening Q&A. Anything that I've said that's wrong or inaccurate has come from my ego or shaitan. Anything that I said that's good has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.